AITA for refusing to pay my friend's bill. I had to pay $90 for each, but I made them give me the money. Now we'll play by my rules. I was really excited when one of my high school friends suggested that the four of us meet up for dinner. It had been over a year since we were all together in the same place at the same time, and even though we still talked in our group chat occasionally, it wasn't the same as seeing each other in person. I had been working full-time as a night shift registered nurse since June, so my schedule was kind of all over the place, but I made sure to clear my evening for it. I didn't plan the dinner, but when they invited me, I was more than happy to go. We decided on a casual but nice restaurant in town, nothing overly expensive but not fast food either. The kind of place where you could have a decent meal for $20 to $25 per person, depending on what you ordered. I was genuinely looking forward to catching up, seeing how everyone had been, and just enjoying a night out with the people I used to spend so much time with in high school. The night started off great. We hugged, we laughed, and we immediately fell back into our usual dynamic. Two of my friends were still in college full-time, balancing work-study jobs that didn't pay much. The other had been working full-time but was between jobs at the moment, looking for something new. I, on the other hand, had been working consistently for months, making decent money as an RN. I knew our financial situations were different, but I never thought it would become an issue. Throughout dinner, everything seemed normal. We talked about school, work, relationships, and all the usual things. I could tell that my job as a nurse was a bit of a fascination to them, with them constantly making comments about how I was in the real world now, how I must be making so much money compared to them, how I was basically an adult while they were still figuring things out. I laughed it off because, yes, I was working full-time, but it wasn't like I was living some extravagant lifestyle. I was paying rent, bills, and student loans, just like any other working adult. Then, the check came. Our waiter didn't even ask if we wanted it split, he just placed the entire bill on the table and walked away. The total was about $90 before tip, which made sense given what we had ordered. I reached for my phone to check how much my portion was when I noticed the shift in their energy. No one made a move to grab the check. Instead, the conversation started turning in a different direction. They started making comments, seemingly casual but pointed. "Oh, it must be nice having a full-time job. I bet you don't even have to check your bank account before going out. Must be so different from what we're dealing with." They laughed, but the implication was clear. At first, I thought they were just joking around, but the more they talked, the more I realized what was happening. They were expecting me to pay for the whole thing. I was honestly taken aback. Not once in the planning of this dinner had anyone mentioned that I would be covering the bill. If they had brought it up beforehand and asked me directly, I would have at least had the opportunity to think about it. But springing it on me at the table, in a way that made it seem like I would be a bad friend if I didn't, felt wrong. I calmly told them that I would pay for my meal and cover the tip, but I needed them to Venmo me for their portions. As soon as I said it, the mood shifted. They gave each other looks, like I had just done something incredibly rude. One of them actually let out an exaggerated sigh, while another muttered something under her breath. Still, they reluctantly agreed and pulled out their phones, though they moved as slowly as possible, clearly unhappy about it. That's when the comments really started. "Wow, you seriously can't just cover it. You're the only one here with a real job. You could pay for this without even noticing." I tried to keep my voice steady as I told them that it was rude to expect me to cover everything when it was never discussed beforehand. It wasn't like I had refused to help, I was paying my part and covering the tip, but I didn't think it was fair to be blindsided into footing the whole bill. They kept making jokes, acting like I was being selfish, and the entire energy of the night soured. The excitement I had felt at the beginning of the dinner had completely drained away. These were my friends, people I had known for years, yet they were treating me like some kind of ATM. Even after the dinner, it didn't stop. Over the next few days, the group chat became unbearable. They kept making jokes at my expense, little jabs disguised as humor. "Guess we should all get rich nursing jobs so we don't have to stress over little things. Remind me not to go out with you if I'm ever broke." One of them was noticeably colder toward me, barely responding when I sent messages. At this point, I'm just hurt. I don't think I was wrong for asking them to pay for what they ordered, but the way they reacted has made me seriously rethink our friendship. I was excited to see them after so long, but now I feel like they only invited me because they assumed I'd pay. If that was their plan all along, why not just say it up front? Why make me feel like a bad person for not wanting to be blindsided into paying for everyone? I haven't brought it up again, but the way they've been acting makes it clear that they still hold a grudge. Update 1. After a few days of replaying that dinner in my head, I realized something. I was tired of feeling guilty for something I didn't even do wrong. The more I thought about it, the more I wondered, if they thought it was totally okay to put a friend on the spot and expect them to cover the bill, then surely they wouldn't mind if the roles were reversed. That's when I came up with a plan. I sent a message in the group chat, making sure to sound upbeat and apologetic. I told them I felt bad about how things went last time, that I really wanted to make it up to them, and suggested another dinner, my treat. I even threw in a couple of smiley emojis to make it seem like I was genuinely excited. The responses were immediate. Sarah responded with way too many exclamation marks, clearly thrilled. Melissa, always the one to play it cool, said I didn't have to but agreed anyway. Jake, ever the practical one, asked where we were going. I had already picked the perfect place, one of the pricier restaurants downtown, the kind of place where the portions were small, the plates were massive, and the bill would be something they'd never normally agree to split. I hyped it up in the chat, describing it as a special night out and telling them to dress up. It had been a while since we'd done something fancy, I said. This was my way of smoothing things over. Of course, they ate it up. Nobody questioned it. They just assumed I had the money to burn and, most importantly, that I had no problem doing it. The night of the dinner, I arrived early and got us a prime table, one of those spots in the middle of the restaurant where you're in full view of everyone. When they walked in, they looked excited, dressed up in their nicest outfits, ready for an indulgent night on my dime. Melissa immediately commented on how fancy everything looked, glancing around at the crystal chandeliers and plush leather booths like she was somewhere out of her element but loving every second of it. Sarah flipped open the menu and gasped, telling us everything looked so good and that she had no idea what to get. I smiled and told them to order whatever they wanted, playing my role perfectly. They didn't hesitate. Jake, ever the steak lover, went straight for the ribeye, adding a side of truffle mashed potatoes because, as he put it, he might as well go all out. Sarah decided on the seafood pasta, but not just any seafood pasta, she added extra lobster to it because when was the last time she had lobster, really? Melissa, never one to be outdone, went for a cocktail, an appetizer, and an entree, treating herself as if this was some grand occasion. I made sure to order a little extra myself, because why not? The drinks arrived, the appetizers followed, and the conversation flowed effortlessly. It felt just like old times, laughing and reminiscing over shared memories. The difference was, this time, I wasn't the one being blindsided. I watched as they enjoyed every sip, every bite, as they relaxed into the comfort of knowing they weren't paying. I acted completely normal, smiling, nodding along, making sure they were enjoying themselves. I wanted them to feel safe in their assumptions, to let them sink into it completely. And then, finally, the check arrived. A crisp white bill holder was placed in the center of the table. I leaned back, taking my time finishing the last sip of my cocktail, and waited. No one moved. No one reached for it. Jake finally picked it up and casually flipped it open, but his face changed instantly. His brows shot up, his mouth opened slightly, and his posture stiffened. He let out a nervous laugh, saying the total aloud, $312. Sarah's reaction was almost comical, her smile faltering just a bit as she nodded, pretending it wasn't a big deal. Melissa, who had been so confident in ordering, suddenly seemed a little too interested in her nails. I kept my expression neutral, waiting just a second longer before speaking. I asked how we wanted to split it, equal parts or should we Venmo based on what we ordered. The shift in the atmosphere was palpable. Jake's head snapped up first, his voice uncertain as he asked what I meant. Melissa laughed, but it was forced, saying she thought I was treating them. I just smiled, acting as if this was all a light-hearted misunderstanding, reminding them that last time they had said covering a bill wasn't a big deal, just a little money, nothing worth stressing over. I could see the realization dawning on their faces, the slow, creeping understanding of what was happening. Sarah fumbled for an excuse, saying she didn't bring enough cash for this. Melissa echoed the same, muttering that she hadn't planned for something this expensive. Jake didn't even bother pretending, sighing deeply like this was some great injustice. I reached for my card, placing it on the table as I reminded them that Venmo existed, just like last time. The silence that followed was the most satisfying thing I had experienced in months. Slowly, reluctantly, they pulled out their phones. One by one, they transferred the money, their enthusiasm from earlier completely gone. No more jokes about my big girl job, no more side eyes about being selfish. Just quiet compliance, their faces ranging from mild embarrassment to pure irritation. I covered the tip, because of course I did, and thanked them sweetly for such a lovely night. Update 2. I barely had time to get home before my phone started blowing up. The group chat, once full of memes, inside jokes, and casual conversation, was now a full-blown war zone. My screen lit up with notification after notification, each message dripping with indignation and self-righteous anger. Jake was the first to lash out, calling the whole thing seriously messed up. Sarah followed, accusing me of knowing they couldn't afford a place like that. Melissa, never one to be left out, chimed in with her own outrage, saying she couldn't believe I did all of that just to prove a point. I let them rant, watching the messages pile up as they spiraled deeper into their shared fury. It was fascinating, really, how quickly they turned, how easily they played the victims in a situation they had orchestrated for themselves. They were so caught up in their own anger that they didn't even realize how ridiculous they sounded. I waited, letting the weight of their words settle, before finally replying. I pointed out the obvious. They didn't mind when they expected me to cover the bill. They didn't hesitate to put me on the spot, to guilt-trip me into paying for all of them just because I had a job. They had laughed, side-eyed, and whispered among themselves when I asked them to cover their own meals, but now, when the roles were reversed, suddenly it was a betrayal. Suddenly, I was the villain. Jake fired back immediately, full of righteous fury. This was different, he insisted, because I was the one who invited them this time. I had set them up. I had manipulated the situation to make them feel bad. It was a pathetic attempt at justifying what they had done, and I wasn't about to let it slide. I reminded him that they had invited me to dinner last time, and it hadn't seemed to matter then. They had no problem with expectations when it wasn't them footing the bill. Silence. Sarah, ever the peacekeeper, tried a different approach. Friendships shouldn't be about keeping score, she reasoned, as if that would undo everything that had happened. That one actually made me laugh, because that was exactly what they had done the last time. They had kept score the second they decided my paycheck made me financially responsible for all of them. The only difference was that I never expected them to pay for me, I had only expected them to cover their own portions, like normal adults. Melissa was the first to leave the chat. No explanation, no final words, just an abrupt exit like that would somehow give her the last say. Sarah, more dramatic, sent a long paragraph about generosity and friendship, about how I was changing into someone different. She made it sound like I was the problem, like my refusal to be taken advantage of was some character flaw. As if my unwillingness to be their personal ATM meant I was no longer the friend she once knew. Jake was the last one standing. His message was short, bitter, and final. Whatever. I had just lost 3 friends over this, and I should hope it was worth it. I stared at my screen, at the flashing cursor waiting for my response. There was no hesitation, no second guessing. I typed my final message, hit send, and then, just like that, I left the chat too. And it was worth it. It was worth it because I finally saw them for who they were, people who only valued me when they could benefit from me. Friends who had no issue taking, but who balked at the idea of being treated the same way. It wasn't about the money. It was never about the money. It was about respect, about the unspoken agreement in any friendship that no one should be exploited. In the days that followed, I felt the echoes of their absence, but not in the way I had expected. I didn't feel the loss of friendship, because, looking back, it wasn't much of a friendship at all. What I felt was a strange sense of relief, like I had shed something heavy I hadn't even realized I was carrying. There were no more snide remarks in the group chat, no more passive-aggressive digs about my job, no more underlying resentment disguised as jokes. For the first time in a long time, I felt free. I went on with my life. Work kept me busy, and my real friends, the ones who didn't see me as a walking wallet, were still there, supporting me, laughing with me, being the kind of people who wouldn't try to manipulate a situation for their own gain. There was no dramatic fallout beyond the initial explosion, no further confrontation. They simply faded away, disappearing into the past where they belonged. Update 3. A couple of weeks later, I found myself at a coffee shop, standing in line, scrolling through my phone, and enjoying the rare quiet of a day off. The place was bustling, the air filled with the comforting scent of roasted coffee beans and fresh pastries, the steady hum of conversation weaving through the space. Just as I was about to order, I heard my name. It wasn't the hesitant kind of recognition where someone isn't sure if they're getting the right person, it was confident, familiar. I turned, and there was Eric. We had gone to high school together, had shared a few classes, and had always been friendly but never particularly close. Still, he looked genuinely happy to see me, waving me over to his table with that easy grin he'd always had. I didn't have anywhere to be, and honestly, it was nice to see a familiar face that didn't come with lingering resentment or passive-aggressive jabs, so I joined him. We caught up on life, his job, my job, the usual pleasantries. He had just moved back into town after spending some time out of state, working in marketing for a startup that had recently expanded. It was casual, the kind of conversation where neither of us was in a rush, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could just sit and enjoy a conversation without it being laced with tension. At some point, without really thinking, I mentioned what had happened with my so-called friends. I didn't go into full detail at first, just gave him the basics, how they had expected me to pay, how they had reacted when I refused, how I had ultimately walked away from the friendship altogether. I expected a raised eyebrow, maybe a sympathetic nod, but instead, Eric laughed. Not a polite chuckle or a soft exhale, but a full-on, amused shake of his head, like I had just reminded him of some inside joke I wasn't in on. I asked him what was so funny, raising an eyebrow as I took a sip of my coffee, and he leaned forward like he was about to share some deep, dark secret. Lowering his voice just slightly, he told me they had pulled the exact same stunt on him last year. Invited him out to eat, let him order, made it seem like a normal, friendly get-together, and then when the check came, they all conveniently forgot their wallets or made little comments about how much better he was doing financially. He had just started a new job at the time, fresh into his career, and they had framed it the same way, talking about how grown-up he was now, how he was making real money, how he could easily afford to treat them just this once. Except, of course, it was never just once. The realization hit me all at once. It wasn't about me being a nurse. It wasn't about the dinner or a miscommunication or a difference in financial situations. It was a pattern. They had done this before, and they would do it again. They weren't friends looking to reconnect, they were opportunists. They found someone who was doing better than them, hyped them up just enough to soften them, and then dumped the bill on them like it was the most natural thing in the world. And if you resisted? You were selfish, you had changed, you weren't the friend they used to know. It wasn't an accident. It was a strategy. I sat back in my chair, exhaling slowly as the weight of it settled in my chest. For weeks, I had been replaying that dinner in my head, wondering if I had overreacted, if I had misread the situation, if I should have handled it differently. But hearing Eric say it, hearing that this wasn't an isolated incident, that it wasn't even personal, flipped a switch in my brain. They would have kept doing it to me. They would have kept finding ways to guilt me, to frame it as though I was the bad guy for simply refusing to bankroll their outings. I pulled out my phone and, without hesitation, blocked all three of them. No dramatic goodbye, no final words, no passive-aggressive parting shots. Just gone. If they wanted to complain about me, they could do it without me ever seeing it. If they wanted to move on to their next target, I wouldn't be there to witness it. It was so easy, so fast, so final, and yet it felt like the most satisfying thing I had done in a long time. Eric grinned when he saw what I had done, shaking his head in approval, and I laughed, feeling lighter than I had in weeks.